People are afraid of appearing strange, and this silent, constant fear shapes the way they present themselves to the world. It doesn't destroy someone's personality, that would be too dramatic, but it definitely creates a barrier between who they are and what they show. And what they show, most of the time, is just a rough draft of the real person behind it. This fear of being authentic, of showing our most intimate interests, our quirks, our eccentric tastes, all of this feeds a culture of superficiality, and the effect of this is that we end up not really knowing anyone. It's as if everyone is at a costume party, but no one has the courage to take off their mask. And the most ironic thing is that by doing so, we distance ourselves from the most beautiful possibility in life, falling in love with the strangeness of another person. This tension increases even more when we enter the treacherous territory of social media. There, comparison is inevitable. Everyone seems to be living the best phase of their lives. And when we're not feeling good, seeing others smiling, traveling, working out, loving, gives us a feeling of silent failure. We start to doubt our own story. And then that uncomfortable question comes back. Who is this person I see in the mirror? My dearest friends are, curiously, the strangest ones. Those who don't hide what they love. I have a friend who is completely addicted to games, and he talks about it with such enthusiasm, with such a sparkle in his eyes, that it's impossible not to be charmed. When someone talks about something they love, their soul shines through. That's when the connection happens. It's not about the subject, it's about the feeling it carries. I recently saw a video of a guy. I don't remember his name, but he was a long-haired guy in the middle of the woods talking about active listening. And it was one of the most beautiful things I've heard in a long time, because really listening is rare. We have a habit of listening just to respond, not to understand. Try it. Listen to any conversation and see how many times one person really delves into what the other has said. It's almost always a ping-pong game of personal experiences. That reminds me of when that happened to me. And no one asks, but how did that make you feel? Active listening is simple, but it requires presence. And presence has become a luxury. When someone tells us something, our mind immediately pulls up a similar memory, and the urge to speak is almost uncontrollable. But if we could, just for a moment, contain that urge and simply ask, how did that affect you? Maybe we would finally get to know people for who they really are. Maybe we would be less lonely. And this difficulty in listening is not just a bad habit. It is almost a symptom of our inner rush. We live so fast that even conversations become a race. No one finishes an idea anymore. The anxiety to share something similar, the eagerness not to miss the hook of the subject. And that's it. The other person has already been interrupted. It's even worse when two people with ADH talk to each other. There is no narrative thread. It's a collage of topics, an avalanche of cross-references, and the meaning gets lost. Not because people don't care, but because it's hard to slow down. I have been trying, more and more, to take a genuine interest in what the other person has to say. Even when the topic doesn't appeal to me at first, sometimes a simple question is enough to transform the conversation. Like, how did that make you feel? That question, asked sincerely, has the power to open a door that many didn't even know existed within them. The person feels validated, heard, considered. It's as if, for a few seconds, they can exist completely. Talking about this reminds me why this topic comes up so often here at Pensando Alto. Because what bothers me most today is the lack of vulnerability in relationships. The internet has become a stage where everyone performs an optimized version of themselves. And it's okay to wear social masks. We all do. We act differently with our friends than with our parents, with our boss than with our partner. That's to be expected. But there's a difference between adjusting your behavior and hiding who you really are. On social media, that line has been lost. We create personas to fit into molds of beauty, success, charisma. But in trying to fit into these molds, we hide the parts that make each of us unique. We hide the passions, fears, and quirks that could actually create connection. And the curious thing is that if we knew how interesting we are, we might not need so many masks. Because what is authentic, even if imperfect, touches us. What is real, even if vulnerable, attracts us. But most people are afraid to show weakness. They are afraid to admit, for example, that they are passionate about video games. As if that were ridiculous. As if admitting something like that were a risk. And it is precisely this fear that prevents real bonds from forming. Because you can't love or admire what isn't shown. You can't form deep bonds with someone who is always hiding. And I, honestly, am tired of superficial relationships, in friendship, in love, anywhere. If we can't exist fully with all our strange and beautiful qualities, then maybe it's not even worth it. And I say this as someone who, ironically, has always had difficulty being profound. Not because I don't want to, but because I'm afraid. Afraid of exposing myself, of looking ridiculous, of not being understood. Sometimes I would start to get into a more intimate subject, and soon I would feel the urge to change the subject, make a joke, escape down a tangent, as if depth were dangerous. And maybe it is. But that's also where the beauty of connection lies. That video of the guy with the long hair, I still don't remember his name, but maybe I'll put it in the description, made me realize something. He talked about listening with such clarity that it seemed like he was saying something obvious, but that we forget every day. We are much more interesting than we think, and by extension, much smarter than we usually believe. The problem is that we associate intelligence with an academic model, tests, formulas, degrees, but intelligence cannot be measured by numbers alone. Want an example? The indigenous peoples of the Amazon carved canoes from solid logs with a precision that has perplexed French scholars. According to studies by the University of Nantes, many of these models are now the basis for research in naval architecture in Europe. None of these artisans had access to an engineering school, but they came up with the most effective solutions for river navigation. This is not just practical skill, it is applied, ancestral, intuitive intelligence. And that made me think about the various forms of intelligence that exist. Some people have absurdly sensitive emotional radar. They can perceive the mood of others in their gaze, in their tone of voice. Some people have sharp logical reasoning. Others have an almost photographic visual memory. I, for example, have an almost bizarre sense of space. I look at a piece of furniture and I already know whether or not it will fit in a corner of the house. It may seem trivial, but it's useful. It saves me time, headaches, and sometimes even fights. At the same time, I'm terrible at math. I've never been able to get interested in it. It just doesn't click. And like any self-respecting ADHD sufferer, I only develop skills in things that really grab my attention. I need passion to learn, and that goes for a lot of people. In fact, more people than you might think. Emotional intelligence, for example, is one of the hardest things for me. But that's where something comes in that few people talk about. Intelligence is also collective. My partner is incredibly sensitive, and living with her has taught me to recognize emotions, both my own and those of others. It's been a constant learning process, and that's also intelligence. Knowing that you don't know, but being willing to learn. And that brings me to another point that, for me, is fundamental: the way we underestimate our own intelligence. There's a silent culture that makes us believe that only those who speak well or have a degree on the wall know things, and that undermines our self-esteem in a subtle but profound way. Because self-esteem, especially among men, is still a largely unexplored subject. And when it is, it often slips into shallow, almost caricatured discourse, such as that of the red pill community. But true self-esteem has more to do with how we recognize ourselves internally than with any external validation. It's looking inside and knowing I have something to offer, not in a competitive sense, but in an existential sense. And that's where one of the biggest contradictions comes in. The more we study and delve into a subject, the more we realize how much we don't know. It's the famous Dunning-Kruger effect in reverse. The ignorant think they are wise. The wise recognize their ignorance. I feel this all the time. I'm interested in many things: philosophy, psychology, history, spirituality. And in all of them, the more I dive in, the more I see that I've only scratched the surface. This inevitably affects my self-esteem, because knowledge, while liberating, is also humiliating. And then, every now and then, I find myself doubting myself, wondering if what I think has any value, if it makes sense to share it with someone else. But one thing changed my life. I stopped being ashamed to ask questions, because being ashamed to ask questions is being ashamed to learn. I remember that in high school, I rarely raised my hand. I would think, will someone laugh? Is this question stupid? Am I showing off? And then I would shut up. Not today. Today, if I have a question, I ask it. Because this simple attitude of admitting that I don't know has made me a much more open, humble, and paradoxically, more confident person. And it's funny how this brings us closer to others as well. When you ask something sincerely, you invite the other person to share what they know. It builds a bridge. And deep down, that's what's missing in relationships: bridges. We are all isolated within our certainties or insecurities. And sometimes, a sincere question is all we need to get to the other side. I truly believe that everyone has something to teach. Everyone carries a unique experience, a different lens, a perspective that can enlighten ours. But to see that, we need to stop thinking that there is a single yardstick for measuring intelligence, or beauty, or value, because there isn't. And perhaps that is the greatest challenge: accepting that we are complex, incomplete, and yet full of potential. And it is precisely this multiplicity that makes people individually fascinating. Sometimes we close ourselves off so much, try so hard to seem normal, acceptable, functional, that we forget that it is precisely in our contradictions that our strength lies. I myself used to be a more sociable person, the kind who strikes up a conversation with the Uber driver in the middle of chaotic traffic. When I lived in Brazil, these spontaneous exchanges were almost a ritual. Two strangers sharing a ride and, sometimes, an entire worldview. But when I moved to the Netherlands, I realized that this trait of my personality was fading away. Here, no one talks. Silence is almost cultural. And that made me miss that chaotic but deeply human Brazil. I remember incredible stories I heard on those rides. Drivers who told me about their lives with brutal honesty. Urban adventurers, anonymous heroes, people who have been through everything, who have survived life with a kind of wisdom that no book can teach. And that's when I realize there are so many good stories out there. There are so many unwritten movies, so many untold biographies, and we don't even imagine it. There's a poem, I think it's by Verissimo, that says every family has an uncle who's an addict, an eccentric cousin, an unbalanced sister-in-law. And it's true. Perfection is an illusion. Every family is its own private chaos, and it's that chaos that makes everything more interesting. The mess of real life is infinitely richer than any polished narrative on social media. It's just that we've learned to hide it. We've learned to smile for the camera, even when everything is falling apart inside. I remember how I idealized my schoolmates. I thought they had perfect lives. I saw their organized lunchboxes, their impeccable school supplies, and even though I had access to the same things, I still felt like there was something wrong with me. But the truth is, no one has everything in order. Not back then, not now. We all carry a little internal disorder, and maybe the sooner we accept that, the kinder we will be to ourselves and others. But there's another side to this coin, which is very typical of the digital world. The constant need to express an opinion, to take a stand. It seems that if you don't have an opinion on everything, you don't exist. And that, for me, has everything to do with self-esteem as well. Because while some think they are less than they really are, others project themselves beyond what they really know. It's a desperate attempt at validation, and then you see it everywhere. Someone posts on Twitter that they prefer electric cars, and that's it. Dozens of experts in mechanics, ecology, economics, and geopolitics appear. Talk about the dollar, and instant economists appear with theories worthy of a PhD thesis. It's as if the internet has created an obligation to know everything about everything. But deep down, doesn't this need to express an opinion hide a greater insecurity? There's a lack of self-esteem on one side and exaggerated self-esteem on the other. And in the middle of it all, we lose ourselves. This impulse to give an opinion on everything, even when we don't fully understand the subject, is a reflection of this internal mess. It's as if we are trying, at all costs, to prove some value, some relevance. But the problem is not having an opinion. The problem is turning opinion into identity, as if thinking differently were a personal attack and not just an invitation to dialogue. Of course, I find myself in this contradiction too. I just said that intelligence isn't just academic, that everyone has the right to an opinion. And I believe that, but I also think we need to be more discerning about what we absorb and what we spread. Not every opinion needs to become a speech. Not every guess needs to be published. Sometimes silence is also wisdom. That's where common sense comes in. It's about knowing that even without a degree in economics, I can talk about the impact of the dollar on my daily life, but also knowing that it's more worthwhile to listen to those who have studied it in depth. Just as I trust my doctor to treat pain, but I don't ignore my grandmother's Boldo tea because she has years of practical experience, and that's also a kind of intelligence. And deep down, all of this just reinforces one idea. People are much more interesting than they think they are. Or maybe not. Maybe this is just another Pensando Alto daydream. But if you've made it this far, it's because something in all of this resonated with you. And that's why I wanted to ask you something important. If at any point in this video you recognized yourself, remembered someone, felt understood, then like this video, comment, subscribe to the channel. Today, YouTube's algorithm has changed. It only distributes this type of content when it notices interaction. And maybe, on the other side of the screen, there's someone who needs to hear exactly that. Maybe it's a friend of yours, or you at another point in your life. And if you can, even if it's just a little, consider supporting the channel. I know not everyone can, but for those who can, it makes all the difference. Because keeping this space alive where we talk about real things, where vulnerability has a place, depends on this kind of gesture. Here, where we talk about listening, humanity, being who we are. Every bit of support helps us continue telling these stories that deep down are ours too. Thank you for existing and for listening to the end.